Hello and welcome back to 3-in-1, Discovering Our Triune God, where today we are learning about Luke chapter 8, verses 22 through 25, Jesus calms the storm. And in this text, we see that Jesus is the true God who has stilled the storm on the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus is still true God, able to calm the storms in your life and my life. Oftentimes, we're going to be confronted with the truth that oftentimes when we face danger and struggle and conflict, although Christ is literally with us in the storm, we refuse or are unable to look to him for help. When we look into our own selves or we look to others and neglect the true God that lives with us in our lives and in our hearts every single day to help us navigate the storm. But the gospel truth is that just as Jesus calms the storm on the Sea of Galilee, so he calms the storms in our heart and in our lives. And when God in his wisdom does not calm these storms in an earthly way, we know that the biggest cause of terror and anxiety in our life, sin, death, and the power of the devil, these things have all been defeated once and for all through Jesus Christ. And in Luke chapter 8, we find ourselves on the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is doing his preaching and his teaching in the towns around this body of water. And he decides to take leave, to cross the Sea of Galilee into the area of the Gerasenes. This is not a Jewish area, but actually an area of Gentiles known for their pig farms and other numerous things that are unclean for Jewish people. And so the disciples and those following Jesus, when they hear that he wants to take them there, I'm sure they knew that this was a dangerous adventure. But what they didn't know is that on this particular time, they would encounter a squall or a windstorm on the Sea of Galilee. Now, again, this was something that was known to happen. And so they set off, though they are fishermen. And so they are well-versed with the seas, well-versed in how to operate a boat and navigate the boat. But even these fishermen find themselves in a precarious situation as they go. So if you have not yet taken a few minutes to read through Luke chapter 8, 22 through 25, go ahead and do that just to help you understand what's the narrative that we're working with in Sunday school this week. And again, as I mentioned, verse 22, Jesus gets into a boat with his disciples and he says to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." And so they set out. And as they sailed, Jesus fell asleep. And while Jesus is asleep on the boat, the fishermen are passing the time. They're sailing. They're moving across to the location that Jesus desires. And a large windstorm takes over the boat. So much so that the waves are high and the wind is fast. The boat is taking on water. Verse 23 tells us that. And where is Jesus? He's still asleep in the stern of the boat, resting peacefully, preparing for the ministry that is to come. And the disciples are less peaceful, right? And in fear, they cry out to Jesus and they say, "We are perishing." And they wake him from his slumber to fearfully call for his help. And Jesus awakes from his sleep, and with the peace that he had in his slumber, he addresses the storm. And it's interesting that we see the word rebuke here in verse 24. He rebukes the wind and the raging waves. He speaks to nature as he speaks to his disciples, and he rebukes them. And immediately they ceased, and there was a calm. Now, this section is captured, this narrative is captured in other Gospels as well. Mark tells us that when Jesus rebukes the waves, he says, "Peace, be still." And we see Jesus share the peace that he had in his slumber and call the raging wind and the crashing waves to a similar peace as well. And then he turns to his disciples with a rebuke. And in verse 25, he says to them, "Where is your faith?" What a question. What a stinging hammer of the gospel as Jesus, the God of all universe, the great teacher, he speaks to his disciples. He turns to his disciples and says, "Where is your faith? You have seen me heal the sick. You have seen me raise the dead. And yet, in the midst of the storm, while you know I am here, you fear for your life. Where is your faith?" And that same question hits us in the core of ourselves as well. We who have the scriptures which confess the truth of who Jesus is as God in the flesh for us. We know all that he has done for us, and we know that he has promised to be with us always to the very end of the age. And yet, in the midst of storms, we cry out in fear and we tell Jesus, "We are perishing." And not in a confident way that we know that you will care for us, but rather in a panic. And "God, what is wrong with you? Don't you know that we are perishing?" And yet, just as Jesus responds to his disciples, Jesus responds to us as we panic and cry out to him. In peace, he rebukes the storms. And the disciples are rescued from the storm that day. We are continually rescued from the storms in our lives. And praise be to God that we are ultimately rescued from sin, death, and the power of the devil once and for all through the work of Jesus Christ. Through the words of Jesus Christ, you are forgiven and loved. And so Luke ends this section with a question in verse 25. "Who then is this," the disciples say, "that he commands even winds and water, and they obey him?" And it's a beautiful literary device here where Luke poses the question, leaves it unanswered, and then moves on. But the question itself has an answer from the narrative that's just told. Well, who is this that commands the wind and the waves with his words? Well, none other than the one who spoke the winds and the waves and all of creation into existence with that very same voice. And none other than the voice that calls out to you and me in love and mercy and forgiveness each and every day. And this question, who is Jesus, is the one that we get to help our children answer as they read through this text. That not only is he true man, born of Mary in Bethlehem, but he is in fact true God, the Word of God made flesh. True man and true God, Jesus Christ, forever, for you and for me. And may you find joy in sharing this truth with your children this week. May you offer all of the peace and comfort that this narrative has for us, that in the storms of this life, real, literal, or figurative, Jesus Christ is peacefully with us, ready with a word to calm the storms and bring us safely to the other side. May Jesus be with you as you share these words with your children, and may your week be blessed by this same Jesus who calms the storm. May he be with you always, and may you be empowered and equipped to share this truth with your family this week. We'll see you next time.